As I'm sure most of you know, Activision has been driving a lot of hype recently about their 2021 title, Call of Duty Vanguard. A big part of this hype was the new in-game Warzone event, which was designed to market not only Vanguard itself, but also the in-game Warzone and Cold War skins that you'll get if you pre-order it. And while I really could not have cared less about Vanguard itself or this event, it was actually impossible to play any other Warzone game modes until you completed it. So regardless of how I felt, I found myself loading into a lobby. The event started like any other Warzone game, with the pre-game lobby. But unlike other Warzone games, this event had all players on the same team, which meant you couldn't do any damage to the other players, so there was absolutely nothing to do. It took me almost 2 minutes to find a way to kill myself in a desperate attempt to find any form of entertainment. Finally, the game itself kicked off, and oh boy was it riveting. All of the players gathered at the railway tunnel planting explosives while this little timer counted down to the arrival of the train. Finally, after 30 seconds, we got this excellent cutscene of the train arriving, which looked absolutely awful because it wasn't formatted to fit my ultra-wide monitor. But just when I thought this was going to be the biggest waste of time in my life, the train finally appeared and the action was underway. If, of course, by action you mean 32 players chasing after a train and trying to pretend like they were having any fun. The gameplay itself was pretty ridiculously slow, as all it consisted of was shooting at these little turrets on top of the train until eventually some yellow text popped up that said, "Turret destroyed." There was also a severe lack of consequences to anything that you did, first of all because it was practically impossible for the train to kill you in the first place, and if you did manage to find some way to die, you would just respawn right above the train with more guns and ammo. Luckily, Activision knows its fans well and knew that there would be no way to get 32 of its players to cooperate with each other without the promise of some sort of reward. This reward came in the form of weapon skins and blueprints, like this knife blueprint that I'll be sure to use every time I play Warzone. After nearly 9 minutes of gameplay, the first car connected to the train had been destroyed, along with any shred of hope I had remaining that this was going to be a fun experience. At this point, I'm sure even Activision could sense my frustration because they decided to award me with a sticker of a dog wearing a fighter pilot helmet. Truly, a winner was me. Finally, after a few more of the train cars were destroyed, it was time for this boss battle to switch to its second form. A red warning appeared on the screen telling players that the train was now going to fire explosive rounds, which really just meant that it was going to do slightly more damage than it had before and lead to another several minutes of mind-numbing boredom. At this point, I had been awarded the first legendary reward that was being given out, which was the Clashing Sides emblem, which of course made the entire experience worth it. At this point, one of my teammates had decided that enough was enough, and he promptly disconnected from the match. I can only hope that this was a decision that was made consciously, because it's entirely possible that he just died from the boredom in front of his computer screen. While the majority of the players tangoed with the train up close, me and a few others headed further down the tracks to set up an ambush. Unfortunately, a few of my comrades decided to crash their vehicles into each other in order to kill themselves in an attempt to escape the purgatory that we had all been trapped in for the past 12 minutes. After what felt like another hour of aimlessly shooting rockets and bullets in the direction of the train, it finally came to a halt beside the cars that I was standing on top of. I decided to take this opportunity to try and jump on board the train itself, but my attempt was ultimately cut short by my first and only death during the event, which of course came not by the train, but by another player accidentally detonating the truck that I was standing on top of. As I slowly parachuted back in, the game issued another warning that the train was entering its third phase of the boss battle. This phase was, of course, cluster strikes, otherwise known as the most ineffective way to kill anyone in Warzone ever. These cluster strikes were more annoying than dangerous, as I, along with all of the rest of the players, simply had to listen to the deafening explosions for the remainder of the event. While parachuting back in, I decided to try and take this opportunity to do what I was unable to do before and land land on top of the train. Much to my surprise, it turned out that the train that had soaked up hundreds of bullets and rockets was actually made out of butter, as it was too slippery for anyone to be able to stand on it, and I promptly fell off. After merely 13.5 minutes, the entirety of the train had been destroyed, and it was time to focus solely on the locomotive itself. This portion of the battle actually went fairly quickly, with all 32 players focusing their fire on the front portion of the train, as well as being spurred on by their desire to finally escape this event once and for all. Finally, at long last, the train was destroyed, and we were all rewarded with this wonderful text at the bottom of the screen. Finally, when I had lost all faith in Activision, they showed that they had one final trick up their sleeve, and a second cutscene played. Okay, all jokes aside, this part was legitimately kind of cool, and I actually did enjoy the bombing run. I have seen some complaints about how the bombs didn't actually interact with the terrain at all, and they should be leaving craters, or that the players don't actually take any damage in this, and it's impossible to die until the point that you're supposed to die. But I personally didn't really care about that too much, because the first time you play through it, I think it did its job as providing a good amount of shock and awe to end the event. Now, don't ask me why there's an entire squadron of German World War II bombers in Verdansk, because I don't know, but I will remind you that this is the same game that has modern-era firearms in 1984, so I think we left historical accuracy a long time ago. The bombing run continued with the false promise of being able to reach an extraction point, but ultimately ended with the players being struck by bombs and lying face up looking at the planes overhead. And just as that epic cinematic ending came to a close, the game immediately launched into a trailer that most everyone had already seen. Having my in-game captions turned on did ruin some of the immersion of the trailer, mainly because not only were there captions for the dialogue, but also for words that were already written on the screen. And of course, the trailer ended with a plug for Vanguard's digital pre-orders, which not only provide access to the open beta, but also give you some great skins to use in-game in Cold War and Warzone. I sure am glad Activision's budget is being used to design these skins rather than to design an anti-cheat. And just like that, the entire event was over, and in the end, I only ended up wasting 19 minutes of my life. Now, I wanted to add a little something here at the end just to talk a bit more seriously about how I feel about this in-game event and Vanguard itself. Obviously, if you couldn't already tell, everything that I said in this video is full of sarcastic opinions that I played up for comedic effect. Personally, I didn't care for the event. I've seen some people who did, and that's totally fine. I just thought it was pretty boring and unnecessary. Like I said before, I thought the bombing run was actually really cool and immersive, but it was over within 30 seconds. Finally, I want to end with some thoughts on Vanguard itself and what that means for Warzone in the future. I think that based off of everything that we've already seen about Vanguard, it's gonna be fine. I don't think it's gonna be any worse than previous Call of Duties that we've had in the past few years, but I don't think it's going to be anything revolutionary. At the end of the day, I think we're gonna end up seeing the same thing we've seen from Activision Blizzard for the past several years, which is a hastily produced product that is solely designed to make as much money as possible. I've seen quite a bit of criticism talking about the game setting in World War II, and I think that is a fair point. While Call of Duty did technically start as a World War II themed game, we've already had multiple World War II themed Call of Duties, and I think it's entirely reasonable to want to see the franchise go in a new direction. Despite all of the obvious issues that Cold War had, I personally still enjoyed the campaign aspect of the game because it was fun to see Call of Duty set in a new era that hadn't really been explored before. On top of that, I think a lot of people are concerned as to what's going to happen to Warzone once Vanguard releases. I think it's safe to assume that there's inevitably going to be an integration of the two games, just like there was when Cold War released. But knowing that Activision's agenda is always going to be to market and promote the latest release, I think that spells trouble for the weapon balancing within Warzone. Back when Cold War dropped and got integrated into Warzone, suddenly we saw an influx of the meta weapons being specifically the Cold War weapons. And it was a really long time before we saw any of the Modern Warfare weapons being meta again. Now, call me crazy, but I have a feeling that the same thing is going to happen when Vanguard drops. Suddenly we'll have a bunch of the new World War II era weapons being the strongest weapons in Warzone. And honestly, adding more unbalanced and overpowered weapons is not at all what the game needs. One bright spot is that it is possible that we'll get some sort of new map release along with the release of Vanguard. Now, it's not likely, but I think at the very least we can expect a reskin or retexture of the current map. That's about all I have for this one. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think about Vanguard and what you thought about the in-game event. Did you enjoy it, or were you just as bored as I was? If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and consider subscribing. It only takes a second and it really helps me out. But anyways guys, that's gonna do it for today, and I will see you all in the next video.